What's happening, guys? Welcome back to another Java for Beginners video. We are now on episode 7, and in this video we're going to be covering conditional statements and conditional operators. So if you enjoyed the last video, please remember to give it a thumbs up and click that subscribe button so you can get up to date with the latest videos. In our last video, we explored some basic operators in Java. The operators we learned were plus, minus, multiplication using the asterisk symbol, division using a slash, as well as the modulus operator, which gives you the remainder from a division. We also learn how to use these operators, and we can use them in an expression, as you can see on the screen right here, where we've got integer, my integer equals 5 plus 10. So you can see how we've used the operator here. We also learn a neat way of adding a value or multiplying a value or any of these operators on an existing value. So let's say here we had a variable called integer. We can do integer plus equals 5. And that basically is saying integer equals integer plus 5. So we're adding 5 to itself. So this is just a quick refresher on what we covered in the last video. There are actually more operators than just this. These are the basic ones you'd be using for some basic mathematical kind of expressions like we've just seen. The other operators are known as conditional operators. But before we look into them, let's look into what conditional statements are. So let's start by reminding ourselves what a condition is, right? So a condition in programming is essentially a statement created by us, the programmer, which decides if a particular action is performed through your code. And this is if the statement, which is evaluated by Java, returns true. Can we think of a primitive type that only contains true or false values only? Well, gold star if you said boolean. So essentially it takes our statement and it returns the boolean value of that statement by evaluating it, and then depending on the way you have structured your code, it will perform a particular action based on that condition being true. And sometimes we even have like a fallback option in case the condition was not true and it was false. So have a look at this flow diagram here. We've got an actor at the top, which represents the user, and it's pointing to our condition here in blue. So as you can see here, our condition is simply, is it raining? If it is raining, then we follow the true path and we want to return a message to the user that says get your umbrella and coat. If is it raining is false, so remember this is our fallback option, we're just going to say to the user phew. In both scenarios we want to continue the code and go back to whatever the code was doing, which in this instance is it simply go to work. So what if we were to write what we're just seeing here in plain English to start with? It would look probably something like this. If it is raining, tell the user to get their umbrella and coat. If it is not raining, return few and then go to work, because both scenarios end up with the user going to work. Now there's something else in programming which is not kind of for any particular language on its own, but it's called something like pseudocode. So pseudocode is where you can kind of informally write code in like a logical way. And pseudocode resembles code, hence why it's in the name, but it's very informal. So you can use pseudocode to design your code or ideas without needing to actually write it out in your language. So for example, the statement above, the if it is raining bit, if we had written that in pseudocode, it might look something a little bit like this. So if is raining is true, output get your umbrella and coat, else output few, then go to work, right? So we're using indentation to say that this is kind of dependent on the bit above. So here the output get your umbrella and coat is dependent on if is raining is true. Same with the else. Now this looks a little bit more like the code we are going to write, right? And you notice that it's also similar to above, where it still looks fairly kind of like plain English. So pseudocode's kind of like in between actual code and plain English. And it's a great way where if you're trying to design something or you're trying to showcase an idea to someone and you don't really want to absolutely write code that will compile. You just kind of want to explain your idea. Pseudocode is brilliant for that. So let's jump back into IntelliJ to see how this exact condition that we've got here, this flow diagram, would actually look like in Java. So I've opened up IntelliJ, and you might notice actually for the last few videos I've still been using this variable example project. Well, it's always good practice to remind ourselves how to create a new project in IntelliJ for Java. So let's go ahead and do that right now. So let's click on File, we're going to click on New Project, and let's expand that a touch, and let's call this one Conditional Statements. Just like that, and we're going to leave it as Java, we're going to keep it as IntelliJ, and why not, let's keep the sample code and it will be stored on my desktop. So let's hit create and select this window so it will replace what's kind of already open. Perfect. So there we have it, and if I kind of click on this kind of grey square, what it's done is just kind of condensed the code into one line. As you can see, it goes straight from line 2 to line 5. So let's click on this to bring it back into a format that we are familiar with. So it's always good to remind ourselves the basics, such as creating a new project, for example. So if we remember, we had a user and we had a condition. So we don't need to really model the user here, but let's write our condition. Okay. So the first thing I will probably do is create a boolean. Now the reason I'm creating a boolean is because if you remember, we need to provide a statement or a condition that needs to be true or false. A boolean is a great way to get started in this because we can use a boolean value which is already true or false. So if the boolean value is already true, it will carry on to the line underneath and execute the code we want because it's true. If it's false, we can even make it hit our fallback. But let's start really basic. Let's create a boolean value called is, let's just call it is raining. Just like that. And we can set it to false just to start with, right? So here we go. We've created a boolean variable called is raining. Now to write a conditional statement, or also known more commonly as an if statement. So remember, if something is true, do this. Kind of if we were writing in pseudocode, we'd probably, let's just do it as a comment, we'd probably write if is raining is true, print message to user, right? So let's write this in actual code. So funny enough, it still starts with if, just like that. Now your condition needs to go in some brackets. So we're gonna open a bracket there and IntelliJ will finish it off for us. Now this is how you write an if statement. Simply if, and then you need your brackets because you're going to write your condition in the brackets, right? And our condition is if is raining is true. Okay, so let's do if is raining. Now we're actually going to meet a brand new operator. Okay, and this operator is simply an equals, but it's not the same as this because what this equals is doing here is it's actually assigning this variable the value false. So this equals, that's what it's doing. But to do it in terms of a conditional operator, we need to use two equal signs, just like that. And then we're going to write true, just like that. So what we're saying here is if is raining is true. So that maybe translate this to the word is. Okay, let's ignore this IntelliJ warning here. I'll explain to you why it's kind of highlighted that. It's basically given us a much easier way to do this statement. Right, so now we've got our condition, our if statement, right? And we need to provide a code block. So if you remember, this is a code block here. Just like that, right? Oh, get rid of that. So to do a code block, we simply need to do some open curly braces, and I click enter, and IntelliJ will provide us the closing curly brace. And now here is where we write some code to do something. Okay? So this code will only execute if this is true. Okay, so let's say we write some code here. Let's get rid of this now. since we've kind of got to this stage, let's print a message. So let's use sout as a nice shortcut and write it is raining. Okay, because if is raining is true, that means it's raining, right? So what do you think will happen if I run this code? So have a little think just before we run the code. Okay, let's give it a run and let's see if what you thought would happen would happen. Let's click run. It did absolutely nothing. So hopefully that's what you thought it would do. It would do nothing. The reason why it's doing nothing is because currently is raining is false. So this statement would return false, because this, remember, this, whatever's in between these brackets will return a boolean value. So what that means is raining is that sounds a bit confusing, but is raining true? Basically it's not true, so this bracket itself would return false, so therefore none of this code gets executed because is raining is false. Essentially we're doing false equals true. Is false equal true? No, it's not, so that's why it ignores this. If we had changed this to false and then right here it is not raining, and if we click run now, notice here it actually does print our statement, because now, as confusing as this sounds, this statement inside the brackets is true. Is raining is false. Correct. Is raining is false. So do what I've told you to do if is raining is false. Simple as that, right? That is exactly, this is what a conditional statement is. And you can see why this would be used heavily in programming, because there's so many situations, such as if a user is logged in, they might have access to more stuff. Or if a user has subscribed to a particular service, they have access to some premium content kind of thing, right? Such as, like, Spotify, if you've got Spotify Premium, you don't get ads. So maybe in the code for Spotify, there's a, if user has premium, ads are now, maybe there's an ad-free code written there. That's just a very, very high level example, but I hope you kind of get the gist of this, right? And it doesn't stop there, right? We've just used a Boolean value to start with because that's what our scenario was. But what if we wanted a fallback? So if you remember in our flow diagram, if it was not raining, we need to print few to the user. And in fact, just to make it a full circle, we also needed the user to go to work. So let's just print out go to work. So if we ran this line now, or this piece of code, we're printing out it is not raining and go to work. So let's finish off kind of what we designed. So if is raining is true, then we needed to print out go get your umbrella and your coat. Just like that, right? And now, how do we actually define a fallback option? Well, it was in our pseudocode. If you remember, we had something called an else. Just like that. And then else does not need a conditional statement because it's your default value. So if this is false, it will just do whatever's defined in the else. So again, we don't need to give it brackets and a condition. We just simply have to give it a code block, these curly braces. So here we can do an open close code block thingy, curly braces, click enter, and then IntelliJ will fill in the closing one. And this is probably complaining because it's empty, right? We haven't actually written anything here. So if you remember, our fallback was few. So let's just write, just like that, few. Okay, so if raining is true, print go get your umbrella and your coat. If it's false, return few. So if we run this now, few, and go to work. And just to check it works, if we set this to true and we rerun this line, go get your umbrella and your coat, and then it goes to work. So this is essentially our first kind of logic, our conditional statement. So what you met here with the 2 equal sign is a conditional operator. There's quite a few to cover, but we'll get to that in just a second, right? Now, I don't want to confuse you further, but it actually is quite a good point to mention this. So remember how I mentioned that IntelliJ is highlighted this for no reason? Because this works, right? We can get rid of this comment over here just to make it a bit cleaner. If is raining is true, do this. otherwise do this, right? But the reason it's highlighted that is just because there's an easier way of doing this. Remember how I told you that this bracket basically returns a boolean, and if that boolean is true, it will continue the rest of the code. So it's evaluating this expression. So this is an expression, right? If is raining is equal to true, then do this. If is raining is equal to true, this whole bracket would change itself to true because the condition is true, just like that. But since is raining is already a boolean, if we hover over this and if we click simplify, it's essentially just changed it to is raining. That's good enough because this is already equal to true or false. So we don't need to check if true is equal to true already, right? Because it's already literally a Boolean value. Now, the reason why this is highlighting it is because we've kind of manually set this to true. So if you read that, it says condition is raining is always true. It's basically saying that because of the way we've written our code, this statement will never be hit unless we change this to false. And have a guess what this is now going to say. Condition is always false. So because we've kind of hard coded this value, that's why is raining is highlighted. But this would still work. So if I set this back to true, and if we run this code, see, it still prints go get your umbrella and your coat because this is already true, right? This is literally if true, do this. Simple as that. And if we set this to false, just like that, right? And that's basically all there is to it. This is a simple if else kind of statement. You don't need the else, right? So don't feel like you need to add an else. It's only in cases where you need kind of like a backup or a default operation or default action to do it. So you might be thinking, well, what if you've got another if to do? What if it's either this, or it's this, and then use the default? So what if you had 3 conditions to check, right? So if it's raining, do this. If it's doing this, if it's doing then do this, right? Let's have a look at that because there's something else we can put in between this to do exactly that. And that's called an else if. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to delete what we've got here and I'm going to do a completely new conditional statement. So let's say we were doing some really cool kind of like AI work, you know, where you logged into a website and it says good morning or good evening, and it kind of works depending on the time. Let's kind of mimic that behavior using conditional statements. So I'm going to create a basic primitive type int called hour of the day, just like that. And let's say this represents our 24-hour clock. Okay, so let's say at this particular moment in time, let's just say it's 1 a.m., right? So let's write a conditional statement that says, and you'll notice that I've used type int, I've not used a boolean, right? So let's write out what we want to do first, kind of in pseudocode or whatever. So let's do if we've got the variable, so let's just use it. So let's do if hour of day is less than 12. Let's use some indentation so we know that this is depending on this. Let's do output good morning, just like that, right? And then let's do else if hour of day is less than, let's do 17, which represents 5 p.m. Let's do output good afternoon. Okay, and let's do our final one, which is our backup one, which is we don't need to specify because remember the backup one before did not have anything in the brackets. We don't need to give it a condition. This happens if none of the above conditions are met. So for this one, we're just going to do output good evening, right? So hopefully that makes sense. So if, because it's a 24-hour clock, if it's before 12 or midday, we're going to print good morning to the user. If the hour of the day is less than 17, which is 5 p.m., we're going to print good afternoon. Otherwise, it's good evening. Okay, so let's actually write this in code. So we're going to do if hour of a day. Now, notice here it says is less than. So you're just about to meet your second conditional operator. So here we're saying if something is less than something else, right? So this comparison is also a condition, right? If something is less than something and it is, then the condition is true. If it's not less than that something, then it's false. So to simply do that, we're going to do this. If hour of a day is less than 12. Just like that, okay? And then remember, we got to do our curly braces to say, if this is true, do something, right? And our something is simply output good morning. So let's do s out. Let's do good morning. Just like that, right? And we can check this works by simply just running the application just to check it works. Yep, cool. Because we've set it to 1, 1 is less than 12, hence why it goes into this code, right? It doesn't ignore it. However, if we set 1 to 13, for example, let's click run. We didn't get anything back. Notice that it's empty. Now, do we want to include 12 o'clock as kind of like a good morning? I would say no, because after 12 o'clock it's noon, you'd say good afternoon. However, if you did, you do something called is less than or equal to. And to do that, simply just put an equal sign there, right? So we're saying, well, let's take that away and set this to 12 and see what happens. See, it's still nothing. And the reason why, we're saying if hour of the day is less than 12. At the moment, let's undo that. At the moment, hour of day is equal to 12. So to print this message, we'd have to do something like this. Exactly like we did in the previous example, where we said if hour of day, or we did if is raining equals true. We're now doing if hour of day is 12, which it is. So it will, let's get rid of that. So it will print good morning, okay? But to do is less than or equal to, you do simply the less than symbol, which is this, followed by an equals, okay? So if hour of day is less than or equal to 12, print good morning. So if we run that now, you'll see we still have good morning. But for this example, we don't need that. But it was just kind of a good way to introduce another one. Right, we've got scenario 1 working. If hour of day is less than 12, output this. Now here's a new bit of code for you, which is else if. So normally we'd write else and give it our default situation. But if we have another condition to check in the same kind of region, we would do a else if. So as you can see, IntelliJ is clever enough to recommend the else if branch. So let's click enter there. And this time it's got else, but it also has another if portion. And we have to give it a condition. See, right now, expression is expected. So this here is the expression or our condition. So what's this condition? If hour of a day is less than 17. So let's write that out. Less than 17, just like this. And let's do system out and put in good afternoon, just like that. So if we change this now to 11 and we run this code, you'll notice here that it completely ignores our good afternoon. The reason why is because we've got int hour of day set to 11, which means this statement over here is now true, right? So if we now set it to something like 13 and we run this, you'll see it prints good afternoon. And that's simply because now this statement is false. So because this is false, it will now check our second statement. So this block of code is only really executed if this one fails. So this is our first statement. We want to say if hour of day is less than 12, then print good morning. Hour of day is 13, so it skips this one because this was not true. And it's now checking if hour of a day is less than 17, which is 5 p.m. in this instance. It is, because it's set to 13. Then we can print out good afternoon. And if that one's false, it would do our fallback option, or only if we provided it. If we haven't provided it, obviously it won't. So let's do our fallback option. So if it's any other time apart from, if it's before 12 and if it's before 5 p.m., we're saying it's afternoon. But if it's any other time, we're basically going to say it's evening. So we're going to write good evening. Okay, so let's run this code now. And it's still printing good afternoon because we've still kept it as 12. So currently everything still seems to work. So if we did 15, we should still see good afternoon. So let's have a look. Yep, so that's 3 p.m. And if we actually did 19 now, we would be expecting it to go into this block because this would be false and so would this. It's not less than 12 and it's not less than 17. So let's run. And there we go. We've got good evening. Okay, so this is our kind of bit more advanced logic to what we had before. And the beauty of this is you can have as many of these as you want. So let's change this actually to another else if. Okay, and our condition here is if hour of day is less than 21. Let's just say 9 p.m. We're going to keep it as good evening. And now our fallback will say good night, just like this. Okay, and let's run that. Oh, we forgot to change this. Let's change this to 23 and click run. And look at that. It says good night. And that's simply because we've got we've got three conditions. We've got the hour of the day. We've got hour of day is less than 12. We've got the hour of day less than 17. And we're even checking if the hour of the day is less than 21. And if it's neither of those, if all of these evaluate to false, then it will print good night. Okay, so there you have it. So there's a basic kind of look into conditional statements, which is the if, else, and on top of that, the else if statements. And we've already met some new operators. So we've met the equals equals, which means that this has to be exactly 12. So hour of day has to be exactly 12 for this to be true. We've met the less than or equal to. And as you can guess, if this is less than, this is greater than. So, and we can also do greater than or equal to simply like this. It's basically the inverse, right? So that's all we're going to do for this video right now. I hope you enjoyed this. And all I would say is practice, practice, practice. Maybe write some conditional statements of your own. So perhaps think of a problem in your head, such as, I'm not sure, maybe a particular age. So maybe, you know, how in school, if you're at a particular age, you're in a particular year. So you could say, if your age is this, welcome to year 7 or year 8, etc. Bad example that I just thought of on the spot, but just have a play around. Yeah, you can think of some more conditional statements. Maybe try and recreate what I've done without kind of looking at the code. Try and do it yourself. But yeah, really hope you enjoyed this video. And if you did enjoy this video, please do give it a thumbs up. And I would really appreciate if you would subscribe to my channel. In the next video, we're going to look at some more conditional operators to be able to kind of build on what we've just done today. So yeah, practice and happy programming. See you in the next one.